How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we're going to do a follow-up discussion today about the New Orleans escape. Today, we're going to talk about when every layer fails, inmates will walk out. You know, corrections is built on layers of security. It's one fail-safe after another because we know that there will be human error. And today, me and Gary York are going to break down another perspective because there is an update. A maintenance worker has been discovered to have been part of the process. So let me just read a quick summary real quick. On May 16, 2025, 10 inmates escaped from Orleans Justice Center in New Orleans in a highly coordinated breakout that exposed multiple layers of security failure. The escape occurred around 1:01 a.m., but wasn't discovered until much later that morning, giving the inmates a critical head start. The escapees removed a combined sink toilet unit in a cell and crawled through a hole in the wall that led into a pipe chase. From there, they accessed an unsecured hallway, ultimately breaching the perimeter by climbing a fence lined with barbed wire, using blankets to avoid injury. One of the walls featured graffiti that read, "Too easy." I actually have a picture of that too. "Too easy, LOL, bye OJC, and we innocent." A mocking message that quickly went viral and symbolized the breakdown of security. And as of May 21st, 5 of the 10 inmates have been recaptured. The other 5 remain at large, including individuals charged with serious offenses such as murder, armed robbery, and weapon violations. So in the wake of the escape, we have a jail maintenance worker who's been arrested for aiding the inmates. He claims he was threatened with being stabbed if he didn't help. 3 sheriff employees have been suspended, and an investigation is ongoing into potential staff complicity or negligence, and the facility is now under intense scrutiny, with leadership acknowledging multiple breakdowns in inmate supervision, cell checks, physical infrastructure, and perimeter security. This incident has raised serious questions about the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office operational practices and has reignited national concerns about staffing oversight and jail infrastructure vulnerabilities. So today I'm going to bring on Gary. He was on with us the other day. And then I want to show you 2 videos. One gives us a bit of an update, and the other video has Gary York on it because he was also interviewed by Fox News. What up? Let me get Gary in. What up? I'll mute you, Gary. Hold on. You got to mute yourself there. You're muted there.
Hello.
What up, Gary?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back again today, because it seems like every single day there's new updates, which is good because we have to get this thing rolling, and we have to get these guys captured and find out what's going on.
Yeah, and it's going to be a good update. We got some also with some good information. We're able to provide more information on what we believe could be also a concern or just things that could have been addressed. So hopefully this video turns out to be something that we all can learn from. And Gary, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
I'm Gary York. I did 29 years in corrections in the Florida Department of Corrections in numerous positions. I have a YouTube channel called Gary York True Prison Stories. I'm a columnist for Corrections One, and I also work with the International Association of Chiefs of Police.
Yes. And now I want to show the videos real quick, and then I have some information that may be interesting to share. And then I want to kind of maybe share some of our knowledge in what we feel happened here. So let me first do the first video. So this first video is going to be the update, and then we're going to go to Gary York's video.
We do have to switch gears here to a bit of breaking news. This is a story that we've been following since it first broke last Friday. 10 inmates who escaped from a jail in New Orleans. Another one has been captured. I want to put this up on your screen. This is a tweet that we have there from the Louisiana State Police saying that the 5th fugitive arrested, it's an escaped inmate. Law enforcement agencies working collectively to locate the inmates who escaped from the New Orleans Parish Correctional Facility back on May 16th. They've now arrested 19-year-old Corey Boyd, and that's the picture that they had there of that arrest taking place. Also hearing from the Attorney General there in Louisiana saying captured inmate Corey Boyd is now back in custody. He was originally incarcerated on charges of second-degree murder, attempted second-degree murder, and aggravated battery. He will now face additional charges related to that escape. And so we wanted to bring you this update here on Live Now from Fox. If you've been following this story closely, we know that Louisiana State Police have been recapturing those inmates who did escape there from the jail. Again, Corey Boyd there on your screen, he is the 5th to be caught. He was briefly spotted last Friday, hours after the jailbreak happened in the French Quarter on surveillance camera video. Boyd, though, is accused of killing Brandon Fees during a car burglary back in 2024. Boyd, though, has since been taken into custody by a task force that surrounded an apartment building there in the city. His recapture leaves 5 fugitives still on the loose just 4 days after they escaped that New Orleans jail. I want to put this up on your screen. These are some of those other inmates who are still at large at this point. This is what those New Orleans police officers have put out, again, except for Corey Boyd, who's at the bottom there on the left-hand side of your screen. The rest of these 5 are still on the loose. That includes Jermaine Donald, as well as Leo Tate, Linton Van Buren, Antoine Massey, and Derek Groves. So several of those are facing serious charges as well, including for Linton Van Buren's second-degree murder and armed robbery. He is still awaiting trial at this point. Jermaine Donald also arrested on second-degree murder charges. And so we'll continue to keep you updated here on Live Now from Fox as we learn more information and more of these inmates are taken into custody. So we also know that a bit earlier today, we did hear from the Attorney General as well, that Attorney General talking about the man that they say was a New Orleans jail maintenance worker who was arrested, now being held on a $1.1 million bond after admitting that he turned off the water to a toilet that covered a hole in a cell wall. This allowed those 10 men to squeeze through the gap of one of the largest jailbreaks there in recent U.S. history. Putting this up on your screen, that's the face of the person that has now been arrested. We do want to continue on with this. Of course, we do know that those inmates there during that escaped by yanking open a faulty cell door, moving the toilet, and then were able to exit through that hole. Graffiti on the wall included the message "Too easy" with an arrow and an LOL pointing to that gap. Putting that up on your screen as well. We'll get back to that tweet there from the Attorney General. But that's the image that has been going viral ever since. That's the hole where those inmates were able to escape. Of course, we now know that 5th person has been arrested, 5 more still on the loose. And again, as it pertains to that other arrest of the maintenance worker, we do know that his name is Sterling Williams, and he's now being held on a bond amount at $1.1 million. Attorney General Murrow is saying that it's $100,000 for each charge that he is now facing. Saying at the bottom, if you are helping any of these escaped inmates in any way, you too will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Wanted to get that story in for you here on Live Now from Fox. We'll continue to keep you updated. If we have any other updates, any more of those inmates captured.
Hey, so I want to show your video as well, and then we'll get into the discussion. So there's one more video, guys. Then we got some information and some knowledge we'd like to share with you guys. So let me do one more.
Orleans Sheriff's Office supervisor says understaffing at the jail led to protocol violations before Friday's escape.
He and a longtime Florida prison inspector tell Stephen Stock that resulted in the security breakdown that allowed the missing inmates to go unnoticed for almost 8 hours.
A source who's familiar with the inner workings of the Orleans jail tells us rules and protocol require bed checks every 90 minutes to 2 hours. That source also says both the sergeant and lieutenant supervisor on duty are also supposed to conduct rounds 3 times every 12-hour shift. Had that been done, our source says, jail employees would have noticed the missing inmates and the toilet pulled off the wall much sooner.
So number one, I see no security checks being done.
Gary York retired after 3 decades in Florida corrections, including a dozen years as a senior inspector for the state prison system. He investigated everything from murder and assault behind bars to jail and prison escapes.
I also want to emphasize the security checks are also the responsibility of the supervisors. So I'm going to go interview the supervisors. I'm going to say, hey, why weren't your officers doing security checks? Are you following up with your officers? You know, are you watching what they're doing, and are you training them properly to do security checks? I see some complacency. Complacency is very bad in corrections.
There is also understaffing at the Orleans jail. While Sheriff Susan Hudson has publicly said staffing levels are only at 60% right now, our source tells us the reality is worse than that. The source says protocol requires 1 deputy and 1 civilian monitor for each pod, 6 pods on each floor. That's 12 corrections employees who were supposed to be on each floor, but that didn't happen.
At the time of the incident, there was no deputy physically on Pod 1 Delta, and the technician that was assigned to the housing unit module had actually stepped away to grab food.
Why was there no officer in that dorm? If there are cameras in that dorm, where was that person, the person watching the cameras?
The Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office says it now has suspended 4 employees after the escape.
Staffing is very low. Of course, every sheriff's office in the state's very low. It's hard to keep people at the sheriff's office.
Former Lieutenant Craig Lawson retired this February after 36 and a half years at the sheriff's office. During that time, Lawson was a jail supervisor and knows the people still working there.
It's hard, always hard, but everybody just can't do the job. It's not for everybody.
Lawson defends those who continue to work at the jail, saying they're doing remarkable work under extremely trying and abusive circumstances.
It's just that tough. And everybody can talk about on television and everything else about knocking this person, knocking that person. You don't know till you're exactly going there.
Lawson says Orleans jail protocol discourages putting maximum security inmates together with minimum security inmates. Yet the 10 inmates that escaped were both. Lawson also says under protocol, high-risk inmates like 4-time convicted killer Derek Groves should have been housed on the 3rd floor, along with inmate Kendall Miles, who was recaptured in the French Quarter following the escape. Miles had previously escaped 2 other times from juvenile detention centers. Lawson says inmates like Groves and Miles are high risk and should be separated from others instead of in the minimum security area with pretrial inmates.
Different classification inmates is that when you have a high security risk inmate, you try to put them separately as much as possible.
But Lawson also says that in his experience, that's not always possible because of overcrowding.
If you have no place to put them, you're putting unsentenced and convicted people together because you have no place to put them.
We reached out to the sheriff requesting an interview to discuss protocols at the prison and staffing challenges. We didn't hear back. However, following the escape, the sheriff's office publicly admitted that the different classification of inmates should not have been housed together in the same pod.
All right, Gary, so let's quickly go over the classification concern, because I think there's going to be people from the outside looking in that may not understand how much of a serious concern that could be. So let's talk about having inmates misclassified. How does that process work?
Well, number one, for the safety and security of our officers, civilian staff, and the inmates that are incarcerated at the prison, as well as the safety of the public, we must classify our inmates properly, because we must be able to manage our inmate population and know that everything is classified for safety purposes. For example, this one inmate was a murderer and another inmate was sentenced to state time already. In our jail where I came from, once they're sentenced to state time, we move them to a pod that is for state inmates only. The inmate that had 2 prior escapes or escape attempts, that inmate would be coded as a high escape risk, and he would go into another pod with inmates of similar high risk. And by doing that, we can manage our inmates properly and house them properly. And I don't care what you say about minimum, medium, or maximum custody. We have to separate them to have good control over the inmates.
Yeah, and one of the biggest concerns they said towards the end of that video is having sentenced inmates next to unsentenced inmates. That's a big liability. And I want to mention something. So there is an objective scoring process where inmates are classified, like Gary said, and they're provided a score. And that score lets staff know where it's safe to house those inmates, because they want to house those inmates around inmates that have similar scores. So for the parish county, they're going to get initial assessments. That's upon intake. Inmates will undergo a comprehensive evaluation that includes medical, mental health screenings, criminal history reviews, and assessments of their risk level and housing needs. That's important. Then you got custody level assignments. That's based on the assessment. Inmates are assigned a custody level ranging from minimum to maximum security, which determines their housing placement and eligibility for various programs. then you got the placements and the ongoing evaluation. So when you have inmates that are in for these major crimes, and like Gary said, and you're putting them next to inmates who haven't even been sentenced or minor crimes, it's not a safe environment. And with that said, when I'm hearing some of these inmates from the crimes they did, they could have been death row candidates for Angola, because Louisiana still has the death penalty. So again, the classification system is very important because it alleviates liability. One, it makes sure that you put the inmates where they're supposed to be, but also it's as safe as possible. So having inmates like this and being placed in lower levels based on their status is a high no-no. What I would have done, I'm sure Gary would agree, is if I wasn't able to place somebody, I would ask for a neighboring county jail to assist or the Department of Corrections to assist. And hopefully we would work together before putting them into some level of misclassification. We would have to exhaust all efforts, including outside help. That's how important this is to do correctly. Would you agree? I mean, counties could assist each other. The state could assist if needed.
Yes, exactly. And you said the word, the magic word. There's also liability, because there's still 5 inmates on the loose. If one of those inmates injures or God forbid, kills somebody while on the run, when they go back for civil lawsuits against this jail, they are going to say, hey, you violated your classification policies, you violated your policies and procedures. No excuse. We have had inmates that were high risk in Polk County, and we asked to send some of them to the neighboring county called Hardee County and vice versa. We can work with other jails if we don't have room. We can work with the state, call the state up. Hey, this is Polk County Jail calling State Department of Corrections, Tallahassee, classification. Hey, can you guys take about 30 from us? We're really hurting on beds, and we're running the risk of not being able to keep them separated. And the state's going to work with you. They're going to say, okay, shoot up 30 to so-and-so, and we'll take them in a little bit ahead of time. So you're correct, Anthony, on that.
Yeah, there'll be the contracts that we talked about that will be established between counties or between the state and the county. Now, there's a couple of things. Let me do this real quick. Something that I wanted to touch on yesterday, but we didn't get a chance to touch on. So someone sent me 2 pictures that I thought were unique. So as you could see, you got this picture. This is where I think it's the other side of where the toilet was, kind of broken off. But this picture right here, if you notice, part of the bar was not bended, but I think sewed. What's it called? Cut off or whatever you want to do. Chisel. I don't know, however the verbiage is. So that means that I believe that this could have been pre-planned, because that doesn't just happen in the moment that you saw in the video, because the guy that starts pushing on the door does it a little bit around maybe a little before 12:30, I forget the exact time in the morning, and then works its way to 101 a.m. They're already out. So this, I think, was already pre-planned, because that would take time to cut off. So I think that this was already done, and that's why they were targeting that cell, because the hard part was already done. They already had this part removed so they could fit through, and on top of that, they probably already had the bolts removed. So now everything's in play, but the only obstacle we have now is this door that's shut. But no worries here, because no one's going to be watching the floor. So we'll go ahead at this time and start messing with that door, and then that will get us in, because that from a little birdie, basically they do believe that this was pre-planned and that was the target cell, because everything was already set for them to move that toilet and go through the back of the toilet out into that maintenance area and ultimately out of the facility. You see that it looks like it was cut off. You know, what's your thoughts on that, guy? Do you agree?
I not only agree on it, but my opinion only. I believe that we're going to end up having more than the maintenance man involved. And if I was investigating this, I want to know who helped saw that off. Did they provide the tools to the inmates, or was the maintenance man also involved in that as well? If not, I believe we're going to find out as time goes on, somebody else was involved. I believe they have 4 other staff members on suspension right now. But as time goes on and people start to talk, as they will, because there'll be plea deals offered, I think we're going to learn that there's some more staff involved than just maintenance man.
Now, Gary, we always in corrections. I kind of mentioned this, I think, at the beginning. I want to mention it now. We develop fail safes because we know realistically that staff are going to make mistakes. So when policy and procedure is developed, you are going to basically kind of run through scenarios, kind of what ifs, to make sure that you keep your T's crossed, your I's dotted, just to make sure, because there's going to be human error. And I always tell people, when you create policy, don't expect perfection from your staff, because situations are going to happen that's going to require some adapting and adjusting. So we need layers upon layers upon layers. So now when we watch this video in the last one where the inmate is pulling on a door that's not really in good shape anyway, he's able to move it and then get through from the group inmates are able to get through the cell, make their way out. There are so many layers that are not in play. There's no obstacles between that inmate trying to open the door and for those group of inmates to leave. So what would be an obstacle? The tours, the supervisors that should be visiting it three times every 12 hours. So you're looking at probably 2 visits from a sergeant, 1 visit from a lieutenant. I'll guarantee you the sergeant, one of their visits should be a cell to cell. They should be checking cell to cell. So I'd be very curious of, outside of the officer on the floor, which we didn't see, but there should be one of the supervisors should be doing a cell to cell check to make sure all the inmates are good and where they're supposed to be. And then you got, again, not noticing that they're missing for 8 hours. That's a big concern, because if there was the escape, usually it could happen. We're not perfect, but how fast is our response? How fast is our ability to catch the concern so we can try to get right behind it? So Russ, sorry, Russ. So Gary, when you're watching this, I know from your experience, from your almost 30 years of experience, when you see that there are no obstacles, that there's no layers here that really involve the basics of Corrections 101, I think that's a concern.
It's a huge concern, and I believe that a culture study of that agency is going to have to be done, because they're going to have to correct all these things that are not working for them. So a complete culture study needs to be done. But one thing that really caught my eye is the 90-minute to 2 hours they have to check. Well, everywhere I worked,
wait, that's in policy? I'm sorry, that's in policy? I never knew that. They have a 90-minute to 2 hour check in policy?
A 90-minute to 2 hour check. And what bothers me is the jail I came from, every 30 minutes we must make our rounds. And for some inmates, depending on their code and high risk, every 10 minutes even. So when I see this, that they had 90 minutes to 2 hour checks throughout the night, I'm thinking, okay, in 90 minutes, there could be several suicides take place. What is the liability there? Because if you're not watching your inmates for 90 minutes to 2 hours, how can you prevent an escape? How can you prevent a suicide? How can you prevent an inmate choking to death? There's reasons we do 30-minute checks. And it was reported today, last night, on the news, that when they interviewed the agency, that they had 90-minute to 2 hour checks throughout the night, and 3 times a night the supervisor should check. Well, the supervisors obviously didn't check, and 90 minutes to 2 hours is way too long. Too many things can happen.
So Gary, 100%, man. So like basically, especially on the overnight shifts, sometimes during the day shifts a little bit busy. You want to try to get to it every 30 minutes, but again, let's say it's GP, whatnot. You're going to at least get to it every hour, but you're going to try for every half an hour. But overnight, man, you got to get those every half an hour tours. And I'm wondering here, I wonder if they made adjustment because of staffing. If you only got one officer, from what that lieutenant said, one officer covering 6 pods, maybe it's unrealistic for them to do something every half an hour. But then that's when you know you have a concern, because each of those pods require an officer on the floor. And then when you have the civilian running the camera, that's great. You got oversight, but the cameras don't look into the cells. You know, they don't. All they do is look at what's on that floor. And then the other concern I have is the time that the inmate is out. It's after midnight. You know, unless they're a porter still under some type of supervision, they should not be out of their cell. Sometimes you do have overnight cleaning. I get it. But you got an officer that should be with them 100% of the way, because overnight is when you are the most vulnerable in corrections. That's where your staffing is a little bit more limited, and that's why everything is locked down and controlled. So when you have an inmate coming out of a cell, it is a very controlled effort, not like it is in the day during the day. It's more controlled. So to see that person at after hours at 12 o'clock out of his cell, that's a concern. And then, as we talked about yesterday, Gar, this guy had no care of who was watching. And my reason is, it's kind of funny that the civilian, again, guys, we have to look at things, with all things in mind. You got a maintenance guy that says he was threatened. That's why he did it. Maybe that's a prepared story. We don't know. But then you also have a guy that's, working the camera, or a civilian working the camera that conveniently went out to eat at that moment. I mean, I'm not saying that's the case, but that's something you're going to want to investigate. Would you agree, Gary, at that moment, going out to eat?
You would be investigating administrative policy and procedure. So he probably violated some administrative rules. You would also be investigating negligence. You would also be investigating, was he paid off? I don't know any nicer way to say it, to turn a blind eye and conveniently be gone at that time. It may sound bad, but if you're not doing a good investigation, if you don't look at all these angles, administrative, civil, and possibly criminal, if he was paid off.
And Gary, you made a great point too, because guys, again, we're not saying that's the case, because inmates could have also known that, hey, this is this person's routine. We know they're going to go out to eat at this exact time, so we have 30 or 40 minutes. The scary thing is, I still believe that when you have those eye in the skies, you shouldn't be able, as an inmate, to look in there. That should be a very protected area. It should not be something the inmates could just see what you're doing. But again, that may be just an ideal world. But the other thing is, like Gary said, even if we don't have the criminal side of it all, even though they're going to follow up with the maintenance guy. I mean, was he threatened? I don't know, but still, and I want to get to one thing about that too, but you're going to have the negligence. You're going to have the fact that the basics have failed, that the layers were not put in place. The basics like touring, the basics like, doing your cell checks, the simple basics that help, maintain a safe and secure facility. And I will say one other thing. The basics could be, obviously the officer being on the floor or whatnot, but, a policy that says a half an hour to 2 hours, my mind, if that's the case, and I guess we'll look into that a little bit more, my mind is blown, because an hour to 2 hours on third shift, I have never heard of a facility that operates on third shift that has the officers touring every hour and a half to 2 hours when they know that is the most vulnerable shift.
Yes, and that's what the reports are saying. Now, of course, that report came from Fox News, saying they asked the agency, what is your policy on checking the cells at night? And that's the answer they supposedly got. So if that's true, that's really poor management. Even if you're short-staffed, there's got to be a way that you could fix that.
Yeah, so I always say, like, guys, if you're short-staffed and it starts affecting the basics, then you got to start thinking about what you need to do to, maybe get those inmates to a neighboring county or whatever you got to do, because when you start affecting the basics, that's going to become a concern, and it's not a justification when this happens. This becomes an excuse. So when you go hindsight bias now, and we look back at everything that's happening, everybody could push understaffing, but from this perspective, after 10 inmates leave, that's not a justification. That's an excuse, because if you knew you were understaffed, why are we still operating this facility as if, it's fully staffed. If you got to pick up some inmates and take them over to the state or take them over to the county, was that even mentioned? Was that even brought up? Did the state tell you no? Did the neighboring county tell you no? I mean, how do we get to a point where we're operating at this level and feel that it's going to be acceptable? I think reason being is because once you do it once, it becomes easier to do it again. So the first misclassification, oh, well, nothing happened. Let's do a second one there, because the one lieutenant said, when possible, which means that, well, that means that you couldn't stand and say it doesn't happen. You said only when possible. Even he knew he couldn't stand on that. So he said when possible, which means that this has happened before. And, it's still, so it's funny too, how we mention these concerns now and they're like, well, we always knew about it. Well, who's everyone that knew about it? Because I want to see all your documentation. So like, if they want to say they're understaffed, that's great. Can we see the documentation right now that said that when you're understaffed, that you can't work these units? Because technically, to be honest with you, at all levels, yes, the facility's obviously responsible 100%. But if custody can't do the job, they should be writing their reports every day. Sorry. Again, like let's say the civilian monitoring the unit should write a report every day. Be advised, no custody member on the floor. Again, day 2, be advised, no custody member on the floor. Supervisors, same as well. When they're doing the tours, be advised, no custody member on the floor, understaffed, and this has been approved by who? Because that's another thing. When you're moving someone from a basic post that's needed, because you don't want to just make those judgments using that discretion. That's an administrative call. So if you have a basic post that's not being covered, who did you notify as a supervisor and who approved that post not to be covered? Does that make sense, Gary?
Oh, absolutely. And, the first part you said, you get away with putting people together that shouldn't be together once, you get away twice. But in the end, it's going to bite you in the rear end, as it did here in New Orleans. It seems to me that while this was occurring, since they knew about it, they knew about the faulty locks, they knew about the classification problem, why weren't we trying to fix it along the way? And I think they got complacent and thought nothing's going to happen. Let's just keep going and rolling with it the way it is. And it bit them in the rear end. The other thing is, I have a bad feeling about when the documents are going to be reviewed and scrutinized from the agency, possibility of falsification of some documents we may hear about later.
Yeah, that's where everybody, CYA, one looks for loopholes in policies. It's crazy because every time there's a concern that happens in a facility, the lawyers from the people that are responsible, from the people that may have the negligence, or from the people that committed the crime will look at policy. Even though policy was good, they'll find flaws. And then people will say, well, we got to redo policy. Why? Because it was bastardized? Because they found flaws? Because, they questioned the intent of certain verbiage when we knew what the verbiage was. But now it's going to be bastardized because now the policy is going to be used both by the defense and the offense. So now things wind up changing because people are going to bastardize the policy. And then the people that make the changes was the policy was written all wrong. No, it was written where it was supposed to be. But unfortunately, now it's being used and tossed in the courts around where every piece of verbiage is going to be questioned. But at the end of the day, people understood that those tours had to be done, or that the supervisor is supposed to do this. And then the other thing I had, that's one other concern real quick, is I'm not a big fan of inmates going directly to maintenance. Never was. If inmates have a concern with maintenance, you have a whole level of command from officer all the way up, because this way, if there are concerns, the officer can note patterns. The officer could know if the concern is real. Maybe they'll do a check, have maintenance come, but at least they know that maintenance is there. For an inmate, for a maintenance worker to shut off water to a cell and not to be questioned by anyone in custody, that's shutting off water in a cell and not to be questioned. Or was that noted in the logbook? Who noted that? So if someone is shutting off water in my unit, I'm logging that somewhere. because that's a water shutoff. I'm logging that somewhere. It's not water for the whole unit, but maybe water for that. I don't know how it works. If it's a shared line, maybe it's water for the whole unit. If it's not, it could be maybe a few couple cells. That's something I think are worth explaining. But if you're shutting off water to a cell, it's going to get logged, and I want to know who approved the shutting of the water. Why is that happening? So I would love to know when maintenance shut that water off. And like Gary said, maybe that will connect us to either another person or negligence. Hey, you got people walking into your unit and they're on camera, but you're not logging them in or telling us what the hell they're doing here. Why is maintenance in the unit today shutting off water? If I was an officer, hey, what are you doing? I'm shutting off water. Oh, who calls for that? Why is the water being shut off? Where's that coming from? Because I'm not aware of anybody telling me the water has to be shut off. Would you agree with that, Gary?
Oh, absolutely. And here's my other concern. If you did not see 12 inmates escaping, and you did not see over the days of the planning and working on this cell, you didn't see anything, then the maintenance man may be well aware there's a weakness in security, and he could have done that when nobody was there to see what was going on. So, I mean, you didn't see 12 inmates escape, so you probably didn't see the maintenance man or even know he shut the water off.
You meant 10, right? 10?
10 inmates. I think I said 5 because of the...
I think we're saying 12 because of the time.
Yeah.
It started around 12. And you know what, Garrett? You're spot on that, because can I tell you also something too? Don't forget, guys, these areas are supposed to be checked. So the big concern here is they should keep logs of when these cells are checked. When was the last time they were checked? Now, is this an unoccupied cell? That gives you even more reason to check. Maybe even overnight could check if it's an unoccupied cell. But that's another basic that gets lost. The searching and I'm wondering, did they find tools later on, or were the tools disposed? Did they drop it somewhere in the maintenance side? Did maintenance come the next day and clean it up? So again, I definitely think there's more than one person involved in this, than more than a maintenance guy, because as a civilian, you don't have a lot of authority in the corrections world. So it's a lot harder for you to move freely. I mean, to be honest with you, even if the maintenance person, had, as I said, had the ability to shut the water off, they shouldn't be doing that on question. You come into my unit, I want to know what you're doing. But the question is, did we have an officer in that unit today? There's so much that has to be asked, because in the end, there's a lot of failures in the basics. And I wanted to add on one more thing before we go, Gary, is when I see there's multiple layers that have just create no obstacle, layers that are put in place by the basics, then you have a systematic concern and not an individual concern. So if there was a problem that was, the first issue was a concern, but then it got stopped immediately after, okay, individual will work on it. But when you get someone that can break out of their housing unit and make it out of the facility, when they're looking at cameras and they're looking at reports and they're looking at everything, they know they're facing a systematic concern that, like Gary's going to say, is going to be culture driven. It's going to be complacency. It's going to be a bunch of things where, it hasn't happened here. Go ahead and we could just lose an effort every day, because at the end of the day, we don't need to run at 100% because this facility, not many concerns. So today we can do 99. Oh, you know what? Nothing happened at 99. We could do 98. Until one day you think your best is at 60. Because at this point we're always operating at 60. That's our best. But, we can go down to 55. Do you guys know that you took a huge jump from 100 to 55, even though you think 60 is the best? You think you're at the penthouse and you're still in the damn basement. And to me, it's all about those basics. When the basics get overlooked, it doesn't matter the systems you have in play. It doesn't matter the fail safes. It doesn't matter the layers. You're not doing the most simple functions that protect all those things. And one last thing, we do know that we work in a system that allows for human error, but the human error is protected by layer upon layer upon layer. And when you see something from A make it to F unobstructed, you attack the whole facility. Everything from leadership down, because complacency only exists if it's allowed. Like Gary said in his interview, which was perfect. If there's no one on the floor, I'm going to look at my supervisors because they're my first level of accountability. If my basics aren't being done, let's say I'm administration or the sheriff. If my basics aren't being done, I'm hammering my warden. And then my warden's going to hammer the highest level of custody. And then the highest is going to go all the way down to that sergeant until you put a foot in their ass and say, what is going on here? But the basics, if I find out about something so simple that's in the basics, I'm going to push that down because I am going to hold my warden responsible if the basics aren't happening. That's how it works. It's like, well, they're not on the floor. It doesn't matter because ultimately those basics of accountability travel up. So if the officer's not doing it, it's because the sergeant didn't hold him responsible. And if the sergeant didn't hold the officer responsible, it's because the lieutenant didn't hold the sergeant responsible. And if the lieutenant didn't hold the sergeant responsible to hold the officer responsible, that's because the captain didn't hold the lieutenant responsible. You know? Hey, Gary, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yes, I just want to say one quick thing, too, on the maintenance. We had another fail-safe in place. Master control will call us, say, Sierra 5. Maintenance crew is on the way to your dorm. Lock down your dorm. I would lock down my dorm. Maintenance crew comes in. Why do we lock down the dorm? Because they're coming in with their tools and equipment. We don't want the inmates to have access. And we logged it on the log. Just something that a lot of people know about already, but was not done here. And I want to close by saying I hope we could catch these. When I say we, I hope they catch these last 5 quickly, and I pray that no one gets hurt from this escape.
Yeah. Hey, Gary, if you had anything else you wanted to add, there's more stuff you got to add. You don't have to rush. Is there anything else besides that? I don't want you to feel rushed.
No, I just, the other thing I was questioned about today was the how do you allow the locking mechanisms to be so bad, and how do you let it get to this point because they have an issue with their locking mechanism. One of the things is Frontline reports a lot of these issues with the locking mechanisms, but management can't get the money to fix them. But even though they can't get the money to fix them, I always said, hey, every time you find a faulty lock, you must report it on a maintenance log and get it reported. And maintenance, not this guy that just got arrested, but maintenance needs to get down there and fix these locks. And we all know that inmates do door jamming. That's why those security checks are also so important to make sure they're not jamming these doors or tampering with the locks. Just another thing that in this big scheme that doesn't seem to be taken care of very well.
Yeah, and I think maybe as we update, we could do some more shows later on, see what comes out. And, again, guys, this is just sadly basics, but I would like to mention that this is also a learning tool for us. Hopefully we watch these videos, we take something from it. If the thoughts do come out a bit aggressive, it's because it's attacking our system. So we're a little bit frustrated. So we're trying our best to pull back on the emotion because, you try to spread a good message that goes a lot slower than a negative one. So now it's going against, everything good that we do is going against recently the escape out of here, the killing of the inmate in New York. It's just you try to promote something good about the profession, and then stuff like this happens. As always, guys, the show is Tear. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe. That was